The benefits that is mentioned in Tafsir Imam Sa'di rahimahullah with regards to the story of Dawood and Suleiman alayhim as-salam. And as you see from the barakah of the Sunnah, especially in like the subject of the Tafsir, when it comes to these stories, when people stay away from writing or talking about the things that is of no benefit, like the Israeliyat and the details of these stories that has no authentication to it, that the Prophet ﷺ did not explain to the Sahaba, did not tell them all the details of what happened to Dawood and Suleiman alayhim as-salam as it is in the books of the Israeliyat. So you'd find the barakah of that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make ways for the people of knowledge to expand on these benefits, far more than if these details were mentioned. So this is barakah of following the sunnah in matters of tafsir and every matter in which what really matters is to know the benefits from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, because every word is meant to be there for us to learn, whether it's in a story of the Quran or anything else. And these stories confirms the other ayat in the Quran that is basically the principles of the deen or the benefits that we all learn, because the stories are basically the practical actions of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, the struggle between the truth and falsehood. The Quran has no contradictions to it. So the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth are shown clearly in these stories, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated them in other than the context of stories. Continuing, inshallah ta'ala, the benefits, he says from these benefits, أن سليمان عليه السلام من فضائل داود. Suleiman alayhi salam, he's the son of Dawood. So he's one of the virtues of Dawood. وَمِن مِنَّنِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. And one of the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon Dawood, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon him Suleiman. And that's why من أكبر نعم الله على عبده, from the great favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon someone, أن يهب له ولدا صالحا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bestow upon him a righteous son. فإن كان عالما كان نورا على نور. And if he becomes alim, this is light upon light. So the minimum, of course, requirement is to be salih, is to be righteous. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him to be a alim, with what the word of alim means, this is one of the greatest favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon someone. And that's why Al-Hasan al-Basri and others, they said something in the meanings of which, something close to that meaning, that from the greatest favor upon someone that is righteous, أن تقر عينه بولد صالح. One of the greatest favors of Allah upon someone righteous is that Allah provide for him a righteous son. This is from the na'im, from the delight of this dunya, of this world, if a person is righteous. Because if a person is not righteous, he doesn't care whether his children are righteous or not. And of course, this is either from the kasb, from the earnings of the parents when they raise their children to be righteous, but the guidance is in the hands of Allah. So even if they take the means, at the end the guidance is in the hands of Allah. Nuh alayhi salam, his son, was a disbeliever. And it's also something for the offspring, for the children to know. If they want to be righteous to their parents and they care and they love their parents, the most important thing is for them to be righteous, for them to be obedient to Allah. This is the real benefit to the parents in their life and after they pass away, because it becomes in the balance of the deeds of the parents. So, and this is one of the things that many people, they don't remind, especially the youth with, that for them to do the best favor to their parents is for them to be righteous. And that's, again, it's from the minan of Allah, from the favors of Allah, and one of the things to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. From these benefits also, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَوَهَبْنَا لِدَاوُودَ سُلَيْمَانَ, we bestowed our favor upon us for Dawood to have Suleiman. From these benefits also, ثَنَاءُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى عَلَى سُلَيْمَانَ وَمَدْحِي فِي قَوْلِ نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised Suleiman alayhi salam by saying, نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ, what a great abd and servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he was. إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ, he constantly returned to Allah. So the praise here is that he is he's constantly returning to Allah. And we talked about the awwab. returning, if it's correct, this is the literal meaning of it, returning with ilm and returning with tawbah. With ilm, to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him. He does not initiate anything. He does not suggest anything. You don't have an opinion over things unless you return to Allah. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the kingdom, as we heard, but he gave him the righteousness that he would do this based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or based on what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From these benefits, كثرة خير الله وبره بعبيده أن يمن عليهم بصالح الأعمال ومكارم الأخلاق ثم يثني عليهم بها وهو المتفضل الوهاب. This is one of the also the great favors that brings the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He bestows His favor upon His true servants by giving them the ability to do these actions and by having them to have the best manners. Then He praises them and He rewards them for it, while He is the one subhanahu wa ta'ala that bestowed that favor upon them. Without the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would have not been righteous. Like, who's the one that made them righteous? Allah. Who's the one that gave them the best manners? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He's the one that bestowed this upon them, and then He praised them because of them being righteous. So this shows the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the meaning of Al-Wahhab, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the bestower of all things, and not just the reward of actions, but also what made the people get the rewards. So if a person is obedient to Allah, this is something that Allah bestowed upon the person. And the person does not see himself as the one that guided himself. It's the guidance from Allah. That's one of the basic characteristics of the believers. The disbelievers, they always attribute everything to themselves. The believers, they don't attribute anything to themselves. They attribute the sins to themselves. So if they have sins, if they commit sins, even though everything is by Allah, but it's the adab and the manners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they attribute their sins to their weakness, and the good deeds they attribute it to Allah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that made them have these manners and these qualities. And then you see the favor or the mercy of Allah, that He praised them even though He's the one that bestowed this favor upon them. ومنها تقديم سليمان محبة الله تعالى على محبة كل شيء. One of the great lessons is that Suleiman alayhi salam, he put forward, he preferred the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over the love of everything. In the story of the horses, that when it just made them forget an act of worship that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to do, which he's excused. And al-khata' wal-nisyan, or to make something by mistake, or to forget something, even if it's fard, if it's a mandatory thing, and it's once in a while or once in lifetime or something like this, the person has no sin whatsoever. But the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that occupied his heart made him, as the opinion of that, he get rid of all of them. Why? Because it took him away from the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, if something that a person loves, that he finds that it's taken him away from what the actions that are the means to have the love of Allah, because it's one of the signs of the love of Allah that you make ithar, you choose the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves over what you as a human being loves. So if someone finds like this, he falls always and he slips away in this, it doesn't mean that he has to get rid of what is permissible, but he knows that this is a test from Allah. And therefore, as it will come, this famous principle, as he would say it from the benefits, the one after this one, after not right after it, that man taraka shay'an lillah awadahu Allahu khayran min. Whoever leaves something for the sake of Allah, Allah will replace it by something better for him. And this is something that never fails, but with the condition that he leaves it for the sake of Allah. He do things with ilm and he leaves things with ilm. And that's why if a person like that is to ask a person of knowledge. And people are in level in this. To leave the haram, this is obvious. There's no goodness in the haram whatsoever. Even if a person thinks that the entire world will change to be the most righteous people if he commits haram, this is all falsehood. No excuse whatsoever. A person, if it's haram, if it's clear haram, then the ruling is very clear, and that is to leave it. And there's no excuse to continue to be in the haram. Allah forbade it, and he thinks that there is some goodness will come as a result of committing sins and disobeying Allah, this is contradicting, this is haram. What is meant here by this is if something is permissible, wealth, certain occupations that a person has, but it's taken him away from the deen. So in itself, if a person looks at it, it's halal, there's nothing wrong with it. If he's not able to fulfill the duties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to do, then if he has a choice, he should choose what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But most of the time, it's the weakness within oneself that a person can have both. So this is not an answer to everyone in every situation, but it requires for the person to have more knowledge, to ask the people of knowledge, to have the heart attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be truthfully, sincerely seeking the pleasure of Allah. I would say something also, but it has to be understood in the right way. Seeking knowledge, for example. And there's always the question of if a person seeks knowledge, how he's going to have his earnings and to support himself. If he truly, sincerely wants to seek knowledge, the matter will be made easy for him. How is that? Before he gets into that stage, he'll say, how? But I need to know how that's going to happen. If he wants to make sure before he takes the means, then maybe this is not the path for him. You don't have to. It's not a must for you. You can take another path as long as you're righteous and obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you want to take the path to be among the people of knowledge, as the ulama they say, you cannot be attached to or concerned of what's going to happen. It's going to happen, inshallah ta'ala, but have that truthfulness, and it's not that you won't take the means, you will take the means. But if that's going to be like a condition, I'm not going to seek knowledge till I figure it out first, then seek something else. But once you take the steps and you take the means and this is the most important thing in your life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make ways out for you that is permissible and it's khair and so on. So it all goes, the love of Allah in the heart, that only Allah knows what's in the hearts. We're not talking about physical things here. So to put that forward before anything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open ways for the person. From these benefits, أن كل ما أشغل العبد عن الله فإنه مشؤوم مذموم فليفارقه وليقبل على ما هو أنفع له. Related to this previous one, but in the level of sins. Anything that أشغل العبد, made the person busy away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah, it's something that is مشؤوم مذموم. مشؤوم الشؤم is when someone is pessimist of something, but it refers here to something that is not good for the person. The outcome of it is bad and it's condemned. Anything that takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَلْيُفَارِقْهُ, let him leave it and come forward to what is benefiting for himself. And again, this is different from one person to the other. That's why we should not make it difficult for ourselves or for others. Not everything works for everybody. Someone, if you put him in a certain occupation, he won't be able to even focus on anything. His abilities are not in that place. So someone else, something else will benefit him. So that's why each person should be truthful with his own self. Is he fulfilling the deen of Allah in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him? Anything that gets you busy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade many things because it takes people away from the dhikr of Allah. So that's why the dhikr of Allah, some of it is mandatory and some of it is optional dhikr of Allah. But at the same time, it's forbidden for a person to beg, to ask, to earn haram, which is of course is an obvious one. But this is in general. كل ما أشغل العبد عن الله فإنه مشؤوم مذموم. So whether it's the most beloved person, whether it's money, whether it's anything, nothing should make the person busy away from the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be obedient to Allah. From these benefits that we just mentioned here, al-qa'idatul mashhura, the famous qa'idah, the famous principle, man taraka shay'an lillah, awadahu Allahu khayran min. Whoever leaves something for the sake of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would replace it for him by something better than it. And the replacement, it doesn't have to be from the same physical matters of aspects of things, right? So A person, if he thinks before it happens, something that is haram for him, something that is taken away from Allah, taking him away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he wants to leave it for the sake of Allah, if it's some form of a wealth, it doesn't mean that he's going to get more wealthier if he leaves it for the sake of Allah, because it says it will be replaced by something better than what he has. And this can be whether it's physical matter, non-physical matter, but the most important thing, his iman, his faith, his tranquility of his heart, his obedience to Allah, which is the greatest favor ever. Because again, at the end, everybody will return to Allah. So he said, فَسُلَيْمَانَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ عَقَرَ الْجِيَادِ الصَّافِنَاتِ الْمَحْبُوبَ لِلنُّفُوسِ. He slaughtered these horses that are beloved to him, تَقْدِيمًا لِمَحَبَّةِ اللَّهِ, because of the love of Allah. فَعَوَّضَهُ اللَّهُ خَيْرًا مِنْ ذَلِكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaced that for him by something better than it. بأن سخر له الريح. He made the rih, under the wind, under his commands. He sends the winds whatever he wants to send it. It was before horses, now the wind, which is a stronger thing, which is even not given to anyone after him. Anybody can have horses, but who can have the wind to command the wind to do whatever he wants it to do, and it would basically submit itself to Sulaiman alayhi salam. And it's from the same sort of deed. Why? When he left what he left for the sake of Allah. التي تجري بأمره حيث أراد وقصد. He sent it for a month journey, وَرَوَاحُهَا شَهْرٍ. And he made the shayateen under his command also. They're able to do things that human beings are not able to do. All of that by the power of Sulaiman that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. Why all of that happened? From the benefit of leaving something for the sake of Allah. That hearts are completely submitted itself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also from these benefits أن تسخير الشياطين لا يكون لأحد بعد سليمان عليه السلام. That تسخير الشياطين, the shayateen, when they were under the power of Sulaiman, the authority of Sulaiman, it is not to be to anyone after Sulaiman alayhi salam. So it's not something for a person to seek, and not something that is going to happen. So those who deals with the shayateen that are doing acts of evil, it reaches even the level of disbelief, wal-'iyadhu billah. It is forbidden, and it's not something that is going to happen to anyone. They would increase his misery and nothing else. Even if a person think that if he deals with the shayateen for some benefit, like some people when they look for what is lost, and they use the shayateen for this, it's not permissible whatsoever. Even if they claim that these jinn are Muslims, all of these stories a person should stay away from, and to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be obedient to Allah. Also, one of these benefits, أن سليمان عليه السلام كان ملكا نبيا. Sulaiman alayhi salam was a king and a prophet. يفعل ما أراد. He does whatever he wants. ولكنه لا يريد إلا العدل. But he only wants justice. بخلاف النبي العبد, as we talked about that before. Different than the prophet that is abd, a servant of Allah. And of course Sulaiman was abd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about him, ni'ma al-abd, what the best slave or servant of Allah. But here with regards to Malik versus al-abd, that a prophet, if he's not a king, if the prophet is not a king and he is abd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his irada, his will, tabi'atun li amrillah, follows the commands of Allah. فلا يفعل ولا يترك إلا بالأمر. He does not do anything, he does not leave anything except if he's commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the case of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. وهذه الحال أكمل. And the second one is more perfect because the fact that he is abd. Plus you can imagine the followers. Right? What's best for the followers? We are commanded to follow the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That means we don't do anything, we don't leave anything unless we get to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. Because the Prophet ﷺ was like that. He never did anything, he never left anything except by the wahy revelation from Allah. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. He does not speak from his desire, it's only revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنْ أَتَّبِعُ إِلَّا مَا يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ. I only follow what Allah revealed to me. And this is also one of the means of struggle that people need to work on themselves to establish al-Iman. When we think that we can figure out the solution for every problems in the universe, just the fact that we're able to think, or even because we love what is good, or we love for the deen to be established, that's not sufficient. We have to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to do in the wahi, in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And when this is the case, it's not going to look from the first instant that, this is the solution. Then where is the submission here comes from? That means you don't know what's going to happen after 100 years from now if you fulfill this command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He wants from you at this moment, at that stage. Because the outcome is not in your control. The physical ones is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like people, for example, they think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them to do, for example, to get into politics and things like this and to compromise your deen so that the deen is established, because that's what it sounds good and right for matter of the deen. And you think and you only rely upon your thinking or upon your liking or upon what works versus what doesn't work. I'm not discussing this matter as a mas'ala here, but the attitude for a person to go by this is to know first if this is something that is pleasing to Allah and what the steps to be taken for the change to happen. And if a person gets to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him, then it doesn't matter to him whether it's going to have an effect in his lifetime or not, or it does have an effect or not, doesn't matter, as long as he is firm upon what Allah wants from him. Right? So if you can imagine the Prophet ﷺ, at the times that we live in, he ﷺ said to the people, do this, do not do this. Would still people would say, but if we do this, the people will cause this to us. And if we don't do this, things is not going to work. You have to be part of this or part of that. I'm just saying, imagine that this was the case. If the Prophet ﷺ said people need to submit themselves to the deen of Allah and to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. You can imagine that in some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that خَيْرُ مَالِ الْعَبْدِ, the best wealth of a person at a time would come is غَنَمْ يَتْبَعُ بِهَا سَعَفَ الْجِبَلِ, some goats and sheep that he follows the mountains, going after their provisions. Someone that at a certain situation where he has to leave everything for the sake of Allah to run away. فِرَارًا يَفِرُّ بِدِينِهِ مِنَ الْفِتَنِ. He flees away with his religion from the fitan, from the trials. Alhamdulillah, we're not in that state. But this is the level of preserving the deen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. You're supposed to preserve your deen. This is the most important thing. And never put your deen, your religion, into some form of an equation thinking that it's going to bring benefit to the deen. If you want the benefit of the deen, this is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're a abd. The abd is to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him. So this is such an important principle that shows how the most valuable thing is never compromise matters of deen, whether it's for the sake of the deen or for the sake of worldly things. Some of it is very obvious and some of it is very confusing, especially at times of fitan, that you would find people, they think that they're upon righteousness and goodness, but they're not following the way of the Prophet ﷺ and the way of the early generations of Islam. This is what I have here. I think this is the last benefit that he mentioned, but I'm not sure. I don't have the book with me. Do we have Tafsir al-Sa'di? We have Tafsir al-Sa'di. معلش. And subhanAllah, right after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned Ayub alayhi salam, a completely different test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dawood and Suleiman, the test with power, the test with the dunya being under their control, and how they were obedient to Allah. Ayub alayhi salam, it's the complete opposite. And they're both, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised them. The same thing was said about Dawood, Ayub alayhi salam. We just heard what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Suleiman. نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. What a great servant of Allah, he was awwab. The same thing was mentioned at the end of the story of Ayub alayhi salam. إِنَّا وَجَدْنَاهُ صَابِرًا نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. We found him patient. نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. What a great slave he was of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. He was constantly returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the same characteristics, but the circumstances are completely different. And both they faced tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they did not choose. This is by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is very, it shows how really to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. Allah choose for you to worship Him more with patience because you're afflicted with tests, mashallah. The one that is afflicted with favors of Allah to be tested is not better than you. Everyone has their own test. But let's see first in... now, this is the last of what he mentioned of these favors or these benefits when the story of Dawood and Suleiman. So that's why, just briefly, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned Ayub, وَاذْكُرْ عَبْدَنَا أَيُّوب إِذْ نَادَى رَبَّهُ أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الشَّيْطَانُ بِنُصْبٍ وَعَذَابٍ. First thing is that what's mentioned about Ayub, that mention our slave Ayub alayhi salam when he called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الشَّيْطَانُ. The shaitan afflicted me with harm, بِنُصْبٍ وَعَذَابٍ, with something that is very tiring, something that is very difficult, وَعَذَابٍ, and punishment. And how that was, whether it's something that, as it's mentioned, something that afflicted him from head to toe, that his body was in such a way that everyone turned away from him. Everyone was disgusted from being close to him. Something physical that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him with. أَنِّي مَسَّنِيَ الشَّيْطَانُ بِنُصْبٍ وَعَذَابٍ. And this trial from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to him, and He's the most merciful subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Ayub alayhi salam is abdana. So when someone is afflicted by something that he doesn't like, it doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have His mercy upon him. Again, each one is according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows of them. And as Imam Sa'di rahimahullah, he said, and with what's mentioned about al-qayh, the pus and all of these things, and the matter becomes very intense, and he lost his wealth and his family, and the only one that stayed with him, as it was mentioned, is his wife. She's the one that stayed with him and would serve her husband, and she was patient with him. أركض برجلك هذا مغتسل بارد وشراب. That means hit with your foot the land, it will come from it a spring or something from underneath for you to wash from it and to drink, and all of this harm will go away. How long did it take from the time that when he was tested till Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him something that is not prescribed by anyone, just a miraculous thing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for him to hit the ground with his legs and comes out from it, gushes from it some water that he would wash himself from it and he would drink, and he's cured immediately. There's no evidence, but it's not a day or night. It said in the Kathir and others, they said 20 years and some said 18 years, but it's of a constant pain and being away from people because of this sickness that he was upon. And because of his patience, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated his level, and everybody died. So the miseries and the pain goes away. And what really matters is for the person to be patient and not to ask, of course, for something like this. وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ أَهْلًا, and we bestowed upon him his family. It was said that even those who passed away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them life, as he says also here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. وَمِثْلَهُمْ مَعَهُمْ, and the like of them in this dunya. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him abundance of wealth and so on. And the hadith in Bukhari where the skies poured down on him gold, and he would gather from it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala questioned why he's so eager to gather this is, and he said this is a mercy, rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so how can he not gather more of it? I mean, he knows for sure that this is from Allah. So if it's from Allah, mashallah, and it's a good thing, he wants more of it. All of that is without complaining to anyone, but to express that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So this is was وَذِكْرَ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, and a reminder for the people of intellect, for them to think and to see the state of Ayub alayhi salam, and they know that من صبر على الضر فإن الله تعالى يثيبه ثوابا عاجلا وآجلا. Whoever is patient with the harm that afflicts him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him a reward in this life and in the hereafter, and he would accept his dua. And as always mentioned, he doesn't ask for it, but if it happens, he's patient, he's seeking rewards from Allah, knowing for sure that the outcome, the end, is what is best for him. As the story is mentioned in Surah Sad, there is something that might not be mentioned in details of what it happened or what happened for. وَخُذْ بِيَدِكَ ضِغْثًا, take in your hand ضِغْثًا. A ضِغْث is the sack of straws. So take it in your hand. فَاضْرِبْ بِهِ وَلَا تَحْنَثْ. Hit with it and do not تحنث, do not break your oath. There's no details mentioned of what happened. This is part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the cure. He told him to take a bunch of sticks together as one bundle and hit it once and don't break your oath. It was said that, as the Mufassirin, they said, when he was sick and his wife is taking care of him, it was said that she was working and bringing wealth or money to take care of her husband or something else, but he got angry knowing that, or he got angry on her in some matter, and he swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَإِن شَفَاهُ اللَّهُ لَيَضْرِبَنَّهَا مِئَةَ جَلْدَةٍ, that if Allah cure him, he will hit his wife 100 times. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cured him, and she continued to be with her husband and so on, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cured him and she was a righteous woman to him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this ruling that you take 100 sticks instead of 100 times, and you just do it once, so that you, as if you expiated for your oath, and at the same time you didn't hit your wife as you made such an oath. And of course, it's as a rule in the deen of Islam, if someone swears by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something wrong, he is not to fulfill his oath. And this is one of the ways that the ulama, they mention in their books, to, after repenting to Allah, that this is one of the ways. If the words of it can contain these types of means out, because taking an oath or swearing by Allah is not an easy matter. Not just that you cancel it and that's it. If there's no way that a person can do it without committing a sin and without harming and without hating and so on, there's no way else, then in that case to expiate for it. It doesn't just disappear. To expiate for it, because the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned in such a context by saying by Allah, this is not an easy thing. So the expiation is like the same of the expiation when someone swears by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something and he's not able to do it. And that is to feed 10 people or to clothe them. If a person is not able to do so, then to fast 3 days. If a person is not, first of all, is to free a slave. If there's no slave to free, then to clothe some people, 10, or to feed them. If not, then to fast 3 days. It's in order like this, not to fast. The first choice is to feed or to clothe 10 people. But again, we have to be watchful of what we say. إِنَّا وَجَدْنَاهُ صَابِرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed His favor upon him because we found him as patient. In this level of patience with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala afflicted him, نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. What a great servant of Allah. And he mentioned also here maratib al-ubudiyya. This one last point here is when he says نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ for Suleiman, نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ for Ayub, when their trials are different. Maratib al-ubudiyya, the levels of ubudiyya, the levels of being servant of Allah are different levels. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised someone, that means he's praised when he's patient, he's praised when he's grateful to Allah. He fulfilled all, these are all levels of ubudiyya. To be grateful to Allah, he does it in a perfect way. When he's patient, he's perfecting his patience. When he's in salah, he's a abd to Allah in his salah. When he's dealing with others, and it doesn't mean that when a person is like this, he doesn't fall into mistakes, as we heard, which is also teaches us that the human nature sometimes overpowers the person, but it's an incident, and immediately they would repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would find a way out to continue to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll stop here inshallah and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from what we heard. وصلى الله وسلم على محمد وصحبه وسلم.